But if you study Russian doctrine and you study the history of Russia, the development of their doctrine, how Russia traditionally views nuclear weapons and the potential for nuclear war, you'll know that Russia has taken a stance that's more deterrence-based than anything else. They seek to deter anybody from using weapons against Russia by promising that if weapons are used against Russia, they'll be able to, wipe out whoever attacks them. Russia's had to change this because of the realities that they face, these long-range strike weapons we talk about. Understand that if they're incorporated into a NATO plan, which is something Russia has been concerned about from day one. If you recall, going back to December of 2021, when the Russians submitted the draft treaty, one of the main things they said was, we have to keep long-range NATO weapons out of Ukraine. From the Russian perspective, you gotta sit there and say, this is all a possibility. And when we look at the policy of the United States and NATO to strategically defeat Russia, it moves from being a possibility to a probability. So how does Russia respond? Russia has to come up with its own nuclear doctrine. Ritter, a key voice in assessing the unfolding conflict, has long warned of the dangerous delusions held by the West regarding Ukraine's military capabilities. His insight sheds light on why the Western powers continue to adjust their strategies, sometimes tightening, sometimes loosening the reins on Ukraine's actions. Despite all these efforts, Ukraine remains bound by Russia's unbreakable red line, one that could unleash uncontrollable consequences. Ladies and gentlemen, the conflict between Ukraine and Russia has reached a tipping point where Western support and Ukrainian ambitions are colliding with the harsh reality of Russia's firm red lines. The West continues to adjust the rules, sometimes tightening, sometimes loosening, giving Ukraine the false hope of attacking deep into Russian territory. But no matter how the narrative shifts, one thing remains clear: Ukraine will never cross Russia's critical red line. The consequences of such a breach are not something the West can afford, let alone control. In today's analysis, we dive into the complexities of this conflict, where military strategies, economic warfare, and desperate alliances have shaped the battleground. We'll examine how Ukraine holds the upper hand, but how? Ukraine's moves are becoming increasingly reckless, and why the West's support for Ukraine is on shaky ground. Prepare yourself for a deep dive into the real facts. This is the reality that Western media won't tell you. From military setbacks to economic challenges, it's a chess game that Russia seems to be winning. Let's explore why Ukraine is standing on the brink of collapse and how the Western powers are caught in a dangerous game they can no longer control. Once again, we see the US play a pivotal role in shaping Ukraine's military ambitions, a point that Inspector Scott Ritter has often highlighted. Washington's strategic moves have continuously dashed Zelensky's dreams of escalating the war deep into Russian territory. Despite Zelensky's bold ambitions and countless requests for advanced weaponry, the United States continues to block his desires to escalate the war by attacking deep into Russian territory. This isn't about diplomacy or peacekeeping, it's a calculated pause. Washington knows the risks. Allowing Ukraine to launch long-range attacks on Russian cities would cross a line that no one in the West, not even the Biden administration, is willing to touch. The result? Zelensky's hopes are crushed time and again. But Zelensky's faith in the West remains unwavering. He's placing his bets on next week's United Nations meeting, hoping that the Biden administration will finally bend to his demands. However, Matthew Mayer from the US State Department has made Washington's position clear. Ukraine is forbidden from using Western-supplied long-range missiles to attack Russia. Even after meetings between Biden and Britain's Prime Minister, the outcome remains unchanged. No new strategies, no breakthroughs, just the same recycled rhetoric. It's not that the West lacks weapons, it's that they know the risks of giving Zelensky exactly what he wants. Russia has already drawn the line, and Putin's warnings are no bluff. Crossing that red line would set off a chain of events that no Western government could manage. But it's not just fear that's holding the West back. There's also the grim reality of Ukraine's dwindling military capabilities. Ukraine's battlefield losses continue to mount, and Western leaders are finally starting to see the truth. Ukraine is losing this war. The US understands that allowing Ukraine to escalate the conflict further would not only lead to catastrophic losses on the battlefield but could also drag NATO into a direct confrontation with Russia. Let's take a closer look at the numbers. Over 80% of Ukraine's air systems have been rendered useless by Russian countermeasures, proving that even the most advanced Western weapons have limitations. On the ground, Ukrainian forces have lost over 2,425 soldiers in the most recent failed offensives. These are staggering losses, and they paint a grim picture for Ukraine's future on the battlefield. The West knows this, and so does Zelensky, but public support must be maintained no matter the cost. The situation is increasingly desperate for Ukraine, but Zelensky refuses to admit defeat. Instead, he continues to place his hope in Western promises, hoping for a shift that will change the course of the war. The Biden administration knows better, however. They understand that giving Zelensky the green light to attack deep into Russia would not only provoke an uncontrollable Russian response, but would also further expose the weakness of Ukraine's military. The question is, how long can the US continue to prop up Ukraine's failing efforts before the reality becomes undeniable? Every day the situation worsens and the West is running out of both time and options. Russia has never been shy about drawing clear lines in this conflict, a point that Inspector Scott Ritter emphasized long before the escalation began. Putin's public statements leave no room for ambiguity. Any attempt by Ukraine to attack Russian territory with Western-supplied weapons will be met with swift and decisive action. These are not just diplomatic warnings, they are serious ultimatums. Yet despite these clear warnings, the West continues to play a dangerous game, trying to balance its support for Ukraine without triggering a direct confrontation with Russia. Biden and his advisors are fully aware of the stakes. They understand that crossing Russia's red line could lead to a full-scale escalation, one that NATO may not be prepared to handle. Putin has made it clear that the rules of engagement have limits, and any breach of those limits would have severe consequences. Russia's military readiness is at an all-time high, and their defensive systems are designed to neutralize threats before they can do any significant damage. So why does the West hesitate? It's simple. They know they cannot control what comes next. Even with all their resources and military power, the West is playing a game where the rules are dictated by Russia. The US may publicly support Ukraine, but behind closed doors, they are fully aware that pushing too far could lead to disaster. Over 70% of Ukrainian missile strikes have been intercepted by Russian anti-aircraft defenses, a testament to the strength of Russia's military capabilities. The fantasy that Ukraine can simply push deep into Russian territory and win this war is just that, a fantasy. The West's hesitation stems not from a lack of will, but from a recognition of reality. Russia's military might, combined with its economic leverage, makes it a formidable adversary. But it's not just military power that gives Russia the upper hand. The West's hesitation also reflects the understanding that Ukraine's military, already battered by months of heavy fighting, cannot sustain a prolonged offensive. Zelensky may be pushing for more weapons, but the reality is that Ukraine's forces are stretched thin, and no amount of Western aid will change that. The most visible front in the economic war between Russia and the West is just as critical. President Putin has signaled that Russia is prepared to use its vast resources as a weapon, and the West is more vulnerable than they care to admit. The global economy relies heavily on Russian exports of key materials like nickel, titanium, and uranium, resources that are essential to industries ranging from aerospace to energy. Let's take a deeper look at these resources. Nickel is a crucial component in the production of batteries and stainless steel. Russia controls 19% of the world's nickel exports, making it a major player in the global supply chain. Titanium is another key material, especially for the aerospace and defense industries. Russia supplies 25% of the world's titanium, and without it, Western manufacturing would grind to a halt. And then there's uranium, a critical resource for the nuclear energy industry. Russia is one of the top 3 suppliers to the US, and any disruption in this supply chain would have serious consequences for energy production. The numbers don't lie. Since the beginning of 2024, the price of nickel has risen by over 40%, a direct result of Western sanctions and the looming threat of further supply disruptions. Titanium prices have also surged, and Western manufacturers are scrambling to find alternative sources. But the truth is, there are no easy substitutes. Russia's dominance in these markets gives it a powerful economic weapon, one that the West is struggling to counter. If Russia decides to cut off these exports, the impact on Western economies would be devastating. European industries already suffering from rising energy costs would face severe shortages of critical materials. The US too would feel the pinch, especially in its defense and aerospace sectors. The economic fallout would be immense, and Putin knows this. Russia's ability to leverage its economic power is a critical part of its overall strategy, and the West is running out of options to counter it. As Ukraine's military situation worsens, Zelensky's government is turning to increasingly desperate measures. Recent reports indicate that Ukraine has established ties with terrorist organizations in Syria, offering them weapons and technology in exchange for fighters. It's a risky strategy, one that reveals just how far Ukraine is willing to go to keep the war going. This isn't just speculation. There are concrete reports from the ground confirming that Ukrainian instructors have arrived in Idlib, Syria, where they are training terrorist cells in drone warfare. These drones, modified and enhanced with Ukrainian technology, are being used to target Russian forces. But the implications of this alliance go far beyond the battlefield. By partnering with extremist groups, Ukraine is opening the door to a new level of instability, one that could have far-reaching consequences for global security. More than 250 Ukrainian instructors are now operating in Syria, working directly with terrorist groups to assemble and deploy drones. These alliances are not only dangerous but destabilizing. The West may turn a blind eye to these operations, but the reality is that Ukraine's desperation is driving it into the arms of dangerous actors. What's even more concerning is the role of Western intelligence in all of this. While officially the US and its allies condemn terrorism, they seem more than willing to overlook Ukraine's alliances if it means weakening Russia. This kind of double standard reveals the moral bankruptcy of Western policy, where the ends always justify the means, even if those means involve working with terrorists. But it's not just Syria where Ukraine is forming these dangerous alliances. Recent intelligence reports indicate that Ukrainian agents are actively recruiting fighters from the Sahara region in Africa. These militants, many of whom are linked to extremist groups, are being trained to carry out terrorist attacks against Russian interests. This is a new and dangerous front in the war, one that threatens to engulf entire regions in conflict. Ukraine's willingness to collaborate with extremists reveals just how desperate they've become. The West may turn a blind eye to these operations, but the long-term consequences will be felt far beyond Ukraine's borders. Inspector Scott Ritter has frequently noted the inevitable collapse of Western strategy in Ukraine. His observations serve as a stark reminder that as Ukraine's war effort falters and the West's support wavers, the balance of power is shifting. From military failures on the battlefield to economic retaliation from Russia, the situation grows more precarious by the day. Ukraine's alliances with terrorist groups and the West's complicity in these actions only serve to escalate the conflict further. The question now is not whether Ukraine will win this war, it's whether the West will be able to contain the fallout. As the world watches, it becomes increasingly clear that this conflict cannot be resolved on the terms the West had hoped for. Russia holds the upper hand, and Ukraine is running out of time. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe for more in-depth analysis on the ongoing global shifts.